The great chamber of the Tsar Prime had stood for 40,000 years, and in all that time, it had never witnessed a vote quite like this one. Ambassador Velkith of the Sithari rose from his hovering seat, his forearms spread wide in the traditional gesture of proclamation, and his ancient eyes swept across the gathered delegates of 900 species who had come to witness this moment. Fellow members of the Galactic Council, he began, his voice carrying through the vast amphitheater without need of amplification. We gathered today to close a chapter in our shared history, and to formally acknowledge what our censors and our silence have long confirmed. The chamber fell quiet, and even the perpetually chattering Nivari delegation stopped their whispered conversations to listen 300 standard years ago. This council took decisive action against a species that threatened the stability of our great union. Velkith continued. The humans of Earth refused our governance, rejected our wisdom, and expanded beyond the boundaries we had set for them. And so we did what was necessary. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly, and several delegates nodded their heads or waved their appendages in approval. The punitive fleet we dispatched was overwhelming in its power, and our surveillance confirmed the complete collapse of human civilization within a single decade of our intervention. The old ambassador said, "No signals have emerged from their space in centuries, no ships have been detected, and no signs of life remain on their worlds." He paused for effect. Knowing that every eye and sensor in the chamber was fixed upon him, I therefore move that we officially reclassify the species known as humanity from contained threat to extinct species in the galactic census, and that we close this matter forever. The vote was swift and unanimous, as everyone knew it would be, and 900 species raised their approval in whatever manner their biology allowed. Chancellor Morath of the Volcari, a towering creature of crystalline flesh, struck the ceremonial chime that signaled the passage of the motion. "Let it be recorded," Morath declared, "that on this day, in the 40,000th year of the Council's founding, the species known as humanity has been officially declared extinct. And may the galaxy know peace because of our vigilance." Applause erupted throughout the chamber, and delegates turned to congratulate one another on this historic moment. Admiral Chris of the Dominion Fleet, who had commanded the original assault on Earth, accepted handshakes and embraces from dozens of colleagues who praised his role in eliminating the human threat. They were dangerous, Chris told a group of admirers, young and reckless and utterly without respect for the natural order of things, and if we had let them grow unchecked, who knows what chaos they might have unleashed. "You saved us all," a Nivari diplomat chirped. "Future generations will remember your name with gratitude." That evening, the delegates gathered in the Crystal Gardens for a reception celebrating the official end of the human era, and fine wines from 100 worlds flowed freely. A species that rarely mingled found common, 'cause in their shared relief, Velkith stood apart from the celebrations, sipping a drink that glowed with soft blue light, and watched his colleagues congratulate themselves on a job well done. He had lived for over 2,000 years, long enough to see the rise and fall of countless species, and something about this celebration troubled him in ways he could not quite name. The humans had been different from other young species, he remembered, and there had been something in their eyes when the council delivered its ultimatum. Not fear, not despair, but something else entirely. He shook off the thought and raised his glass to a passing delegate, telling himself that such concerns were foolish sentimentality from an old man who had seen too much across the garden. A young communications officer named Therese rushed through the crowd with barely concealed panic on her face, and she searched desperately for someone in authority. She found Admiral Chris laughing with a group of officers and grabbed his arm without ceremony. "Admiral, we have a situation," she said, her voice trembling. Chris frowned at the interruption and pulled his arm free. "Whatever it is, it can wait until morning," he said dismissively. Tonight we celebrate. No, sir, it cannot wait, Terry's insisted. Our deep space sensor stations along the galactic rim have gone dark. The Admiral's expression shifted slightly. Though he tried to maintain his composure, a malfunction, surely, he said. Those stations are old and prone to failure. All 17 of them. Sir, Terry's replied, in sequence over the past 6 hours, moving from the outer edge toward the core, and before each one went silent. It transmitted a single burst of data. She held up a portable display that showed the sensor readings, and Chris felt his blood run cold. That is impossible, he whispered. The readings showed ships, not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands upon thousands of vessels moving in perfect formation through the darkness between stars. There is more, sir, Terry said. And she switched the display to show the energy signatures of the approaching fleet. Chris stared at the data for a long moment, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were telling him. The energy signatures matched nothing in the Council database. Nothing from any known species or any recorded technology. And yet there was something hauntingly familiar about them. Alert the Council, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Alert everyone. Within the hour. The celebration had transformed into chaos, and delegates scrambled for information while military commanders demanded answers that no one could provide. Chancellor Morath called an emergency session, and the same chamber that had witnessed humanity's official extinction now filled with terror and confusion. We do not know what is approaching, Morath announced, trying to maintain calm. But we must assume hostile intent until proven otherwise. Ambassador Velkith sat in his seat and watched the panic unfold around him. And the troubling feeling he had experienced earlier returned with overwhelming force. He remembered the look in human eyes 3 centuries ago, and he finally understood what he had seen there. It had not been fear or despair. It had been patience, and now, as the greatest fleet the galaxy had ever seen moved toward them through the endless dark, the old ambassador began to understand that the Council had made a terrible mistake. They had not destroyed humanity. They had only made them angry. Admiral Thyra Wren had served the Veluxy hegemony for 60 years, and in all that time, she had never felt true fear until this moment. Her fleet of 12 heavy cruisers had been dispatched to investigate the sensor blackouts along the galactic rim, and the Council had assured her that she commanded more than enough firepower to handle any pirate incursion or rogue asteroid swarm. Now she stood on the bridge of her flagship, the magnificent Talon, and stared at the view screen with growing horror. How many ships are we looking at? She asked, her voice carefully controlled despite the cold terror spreading through her chest. Her tactical officer, a young male named Korath, worked his console with trembling fingers. I cannot give you an exact count, Admiral, he replied. Our sensors are not designed to track formations of this size. Give me an estimate. Wren demanded. Korath swallowed hard before answering. At minimum, we are looking at 8,000 vessels, he said. Possibly as many as 12,000. And they range in size from small fighters to capital ships that dwarf anything in the Council fleet. Wren felt her legs weaken, and she gripped the railing of her command platform to steady herself. The ships hung in the void like a forest of steel thorns, running dark and utterly silent, and their angular hulls reflected no light from the distant stars. Have they responded to our hails? She asked. Negative, Admiral, her communications officer reported. We have been broadcasting on all frequencies for the past 6 hours, in every language in the Council database, and we have received no response of any kind. Wren turned to study the tactical display, which showed her 12 ships as tiny blue dots facing an ocean of red. What do we know about these vessels? She asked. What species built them? Unknown, Admiral, Korath said. The design does not match anything in our records, and the alloys used in their construction are unfamiliar to our sensors. One of her senior officers, Captain Veth, stepped closer and spoke in a low voice. "Admiral, we should withdraw," he said. "Whatever this is, we are not equipped to handle it, and we need to report back to the Council." Ren knew he was right, and she was about to give the order to retreat when her communications officer suddenly sat up straight. "Admiral, we are receiving a transmission," she announced. "Text only, no audio or visual. Put it on the main screen." Ren ordered. The view screen flickered, and words appeared in perfect high-velocity script. "We received your fleet 3 centuries ago." The message read, "We have come to return the favor, and you have 40 hours to evacuate the SAR Prime." The bridge fell silent as the officers read and reread the message, struggling to comprehend its meaning. 3 centuries ago," Captain Veth whispered. "That was when we—" He stopped. Unable to finish the sentence, Ren stared at the screen as understanding crashed over her like a wave of ice water at the bottom of the message. Below the text was a symbol that made her heart stop, a blue sphere. A planet wrapped in white clouds and blue oceans, surrounded by olive branches and pierced by a silver sword. She had seen that symbol before, in the history archives, in the records of the war that the Council had fought and won 300 years ago. It was the insignia of the United Earth Government. "That is impossible." Korith breathed. "The humans are extinct, and we confirmed it ourselves. Apparently we were wrong," Ren said. She turned to her communications officer with new urgency in her voice. "Send a Priority 1 alert to the Council," she ordered. "Tell them that the human species is not extinct, that they have returned with a fleet larger than anything we have ever seen, and that they are coming for the SAR Prime." "Admiral, they will not believe us," the officer protested. "Send the sensor data." Ren snapped. "Send everything we have, and make them believe." As her crew scrambled to comply, Ren watched the massive fleet that hung before her in the darkness. They had made no hostile moves, fired no weapons, and offered no threats beyond that single chilling message. 40 hours. They had said 40 hours to evacuate a planet of 6 billion beings, the capital world of the Galactic Council, the seat of power for 900 species. It was impossible, and the humans surely knew it was impossible, and Ren wondered what would happen when those 40 hours expired. A new message appeared on her screen, addressed directly to her Admiral Ren of the Veluxy Hegemony. It read, "We know who you are, and we know your service record, and we have no quarrel with you or your crew." Ren felt her blood chill at the realization that they knew her name. "Leave this space." The message continued, "Return to your homeworld and tell your people to stay out of what is coming, and the Remnant has no wish to spill blood that does not need to be spilled." The Remnant Ren had never heard that name before, but she understood immediately what it meant. These were not just humans. These were the survivors. The ones who had escaped the Council's genocide. The ones who had spent 300 years in the darkness preparing for this moment. "Admiral, what are your orders?" Captain Veth asked. Ren looked at her crew, at the fear in their eyes, and made her decision. "Set course for the SAR Prime," she said. "Maximum speed." "We are going to fight?" Karth asked incredulously. "No," Ren replied. "We are going to warn them, and then we are going to get as far away as possible." As her ships turned and accelerated away from the human fleet, Ren took one last look at the wall of vessels behind her. They did not pursue, did not fire, did not react at all. They simply waited, patient as stone, counting down the hours until they would finally have their revenge. And in that moment, Admiral Thyra Ren understood that the galaxy she had known was about to end, and something new and terrible was about to begin. Fleet Commander Josiah Mwangi stood at the observation window of his flagship, the Resurrection, and watched the stars drift past in their eternal dance. He was 94 years old, though the face that looked back at him from reflective surfaces appeared no older than 40, and the weight of nearly a century of memories pressed heavily on his shoulders behind him. The bridge hummed with quiet efficiency as his crew prepared for the operation they had spent generations planning. "Commander," his executive officer called out, "the Council fleet has withdrawn as expected, and our forward scouts report no significant resistance between us and the Sara Prime." "Very good," Manji replied without turning from the window. "Maintain formation and continue at current speed." He heard footsteps approaching, and a moment later, his oldest friend and chief advisor, Dr. Sarah Chun, appeared at his side. "You seem troubled." She observed Manji let out a long breath and finally turned to face her. "I was born on the Exodus ship, Hope's Light," he said. "My mother gave birth to me in a converted cargo hold while our fleet fled through the darkness, running from the Council's hunters." Sarah nodded, for she knew this story well, having heard it many times over their decades of friendship. "She died when I was 7, Manji continued. "Radiation sickness from a stellar flare that hit our convoy, and she was one of 12,000 we lost that year." He turned back to the window, his eyes fixed on something far beyond the visible stars. "I remember her telling me about Earth," he said, "about blue skies and green forests and oceans that stretched to the horizon. And I remember asking her if we would ever go back." "What did she say?" Sarah asked quietly. "She said that Earth was gone, but that humanity would find a new home, and that one day we would be strong enough to make sure no one could ever take it from us." Mongi's hands clenched at his sides. "I have spent my entire life preparing for this moment," he said. 87 years of building, training, planning, and waiting. And now that it is finally here, I find myself wondering if my mother would be proud of what we have become." Sarah placed a hand on his arm. "She would be proud that her son kept their people alive," she said. "She would be proud that the species they tried to exterminate is about to remind the galaxy that humanity does not die easily." Manji allowed himself a small smile. "Tell me again how we survived," he said. "Remind me why we deserve this victory." Sarah understood that this was not a request for information, but a ritual, a way of reconnecting with the purpose that drove them all. 17 ships escaped Earth during the bombardment. She began. 17 colony vessels carrying the last 2 million humans into the unknown reaches, beyond Council space. She called up a holographic display that showed their journey, a thin line stretching from the destroyed Earth into the vast emptiness of the galactic rim. "We traveled for 30 years before we found the Crucible Cluster," she continued, "a collection of worlds near a stellar nursery, rich in resources but utterly hostile to life." The display showed the cluster, a violent region of young stars and unstable planets, bathed in deadly radiation. "The Council never searched for us there because they believed no species could survive in such an environment," Sarah said. They were almost right. Images flashed across the display, showing the early years of the remnant's existence. "We lost 40% of our population in the first decade," she said. "Radiation storms killed thousands, hostile fauna killed hundreds more, and starvation and disease claimed everyone else who was too weak or too slow." Manji watched the images with hard eyes, remembering friends and family who had perished in those terrible years. "But we adapted," Sarah continued. "We developed radiation-resistant modifications for our bodies, engineered new food sources, built cities deep underground where the stellar flares could not reach us." The display shifted to show the growth of human civilization, spreading from one world to a dozen, then to 50, then to over 100. "We did more than survive," she said. "We evolved, and we built, and we prepared, and we remembered," Manji added quietly. "Yes," Sarah agreed. "We never forgot what the Council did to us, and we never forgot that one day we would return." Manji turned to face the bridge, where his officers worked with calm professionalism at their stations. These men and women were the children and grandchildren of refugees, Born in exile and raised with a single purpose. Do you pity them? Sarah asked, gesturing toward the distant stars where the council worlds waited. The species that tried to destroy us, Mwanji considered the question carefully before answering. I pity them because they have grown complacent in their ancient empires, he said. They have forgotten what it means to fight for survival, what it means to struggle against extinction with every breath. He walked toward the central command platform, his presence drawing the attention of everyone on the bridge. They called us dangerous because we would not submit to their rule, he said loudly enough for all to hear. They said we were a threat because we dared to expand beyond the cage they built for us. His officers stopped their work to listen, recognizing that their commander was speaking not just to them but to all of humanity. They were right to fear us, Mwanji declared. Not because we are cruel, not because we are savage, but because we refuse to accept the limits others try to place upon us. He raised his fist in the salute of the remnant, and every officer on the bridge mirrored the gesture. We do not go to the Sara Prime for revenge, he said. We go to show them that the species they tried to murder is stronger than they could ever imagine, and that humanity will never again be a victim. Cheers erupted across the bridge, and Mwanji allowed himself one moment of pride before returning to the business of command in 36 hours. They would reach the Sara Prime in 36 hours. The galaxy would learn that the humans were not extinct. They had simply been preparing. The defense fleet assembled above the Sara Prime was the largest armada in 10,000 years of galactic history. Ships from 30 species hung in formation around the Council homeworld, their combined firepower representing the full military might of the galactic government. Chancellor Morath had called upon every favor, every treaty, and every alliance to gather this force. And as he watched the fleet from the Council Chamber's observation deck, he felt a flicker of hope. Surely no enemy could stand against such overwhelming power. Chancellor, Admiral Chris reported, his voice carrying from the communication screen. The human fleet has entered the system, and they will reach weapons range within 2 hours. How many ships do they have? Morath asked. The pause before Chris answered told him everything he needed to know. Our current count is approximately 11,000 vessels, the Admiral said. They outnumber us nearly 3 to 1. Murmurs of fear rippled through the gathered delegates, and several species representatives quietly slipped away to arrange evacuation for themselves and their families. Numbers are not everything, Morath declared, trying to project confidence he did not feel. Our technology is superior, our experience is vast, and we fight to defend our homes while they fight for nothing but vengeance. No one looked convinced, least of all Ambassador Velkith, who sat in his seat with the weary resignation of someone who had seen empires rise and fall. They have had 300 years to study us, the old Sithari said. 300 years to analyze our tactics, our weapons, our weaknesses, and do you truly believe they would come all this way without a plan? Before Morath could respond, the view screens flickered, and a new image appeared. A human stood before them, tall and dark-skinned with silver hair and eyes that carried the weight of generations. I am Fleet Commander Josiah Mwanji of the Human Remnant, the figure announced. I address the Galactic Council one final time before we begin. Morath stepped forward, his crystalline body catching the light. Commander Mwanji, he said, keeping his voice steady, this aggression is unnecessary, and surely we can negotiate a peaceful resolution to whatever grievances you bombed our planet. Mwanji interrupted, his voice cold and hard. You murdered 8 billion people, including children, elderly, sick, and innocent. And you did it because we refused to bow to your authority. The human leaned forward, and even through the screen, his presence seemed to fill the chamber. There will be no negotiation, he said. There will be no compromise, and there will only be consequences. The transmission ended, and moments later, The battle began. Admiral Chris had positioned his forces in a defensive sphere around the SAR Prime, believing that the humans would have to break through multiple layers of ships to reach the planet. He was wrong about almost everything. The human fleet did not attack as a single mass, but split into hundreds of smaller groups that struck at seemingly random points across the Council formation. At first, Chris thought this was a mistake, spreading their forces too thin, but within minutes, he understood the horrifying truth. Each human attack group targeted specific weaknesses in specific species. Ships. The Veluxite cruisers fell to weapons that somehow bypassed their famous crystalline shields. The Sithari battleships were crippled by missiles that knew exactly where to strike their neural command networks. The Nevari swarm carriers were destroyed by electronic attacks that turned their own fighter drones against them. How do they know? Chris screamed at his tactical officers. How do they know our weaknesses? No one could answer, because the answer was too terrible to accept. The humans had spent 3 centuries studying their enemies, capturing intelligence, analyzing every scrap of data about Council species and their technologies. They had built weapons specifically designed to kill each type of ship they would face. They had planned for this moment with a patience and dedication that no Council species could match. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, over 2,000 Council ships had been destroyed or disabled, while human losses numbered less than 300. Admiral Chris's flagship drifted powerless in space, its systems fried by a targeted electromagnetic pulse, and the old admiral could only watch as the human fleet moved past his broken armada toward the SAR Prime on the planet below. 6 billion beings waited in terror for the genocide that surely would follow. But the killing blow never came. Instead, Commander Mondi's voice echoed across every communication channel on the planet. "People of the SAR Prime," he said, "the fleet that tried to protect you has been defeated, and your council has failed you. But we have not come to destroy you." Stunned silence greeted his words. 300 years ago, your leaders decided to exterminate my species because they feared what we might become. Mondi continued. They were wrong to fear us. But they were right about one thing. We are not the weak and divided humans they tried to murder. His voice hardened. We are the remnant, forged in the fires of exile and hardship. And we are stronger than your council could ever imagine. The view screens showed the human fleet taking position around the planet. Thousands of ships forming a ring of steel that blocked out the stars. But strength alone does not make us right, Mondi said, and vengeance alone is not enough to satisfy us. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made even the bravest listeners tremble. We do not demand genocide for genocide, he declared. We demand justice, and these are our terms. The terms appeared on every screen across the planet. First, the Galactic Council would dissolve immediately. Second, a new governing body would form, with human oversight to ensure fairness and accountability. Third, the species that ordered Earth's destruction would pay reparations through resources, technology sharing, and public acknowledgement of their crimes. Any species that refused these terms would be contained, isolated from the rest of the galaxy, until they learn to accept responsibility. You have one standard day to accept these terms. Mondi concluded. His final words became the most famous sentence in galactic history. We are not what you made us, he said. We are what we chose to become. And we choose to be better than our enemies. The transmission ended, and across the SAR Prime, across the entire galaxy, beings of every species struggled to comprehend what they had witnessed. The humans had won, but instead of burning the galaxy as the galaxy had tried to burn them, they offered something far more terrifying than destruction. They offered mercy, and in doing so, they proved that they were stronger than anyone had ever imagined. 5 years had passed since the Battle of the SAR Prime, and the galaxy was no longer recognizable to those who remembered the old order. Ambassador Amara Okonkwo walked through the rebuilt corridors of the Galactic Assembly, her footsteps echoing against floors that had been reconstructed with a blend of human and alien architecture. She was the first human to hold an official diplomatic position in the new government, and every day brought new challenges that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. The old council had fractured in the aftermath of humanity's return, with some species accepting the terms immediately while others fled to the outer territories to resist. A cold war simmered between the new assembly and these holdout factions. But open conflict had largely ceased. Most species had realized that fighting the humans was pointless, and cooperation was the only path forward. Amara paused at a window and looked out at the cityscape of the Sar Prime, where towers built by a dozen different species now stood alongside human construction projects. Refugee ships from destroyed worlds docked at orbital stations, and aid convoys departed daily for regions still recovering from the upheaval. It was a messy, chaotic, imperfect peace, but it was peace nonetheless. Ambassador Okonkwo, a voice called from behind her. She turned to find a young Veluxi aide, hurrying toward her with a datapad in hand. Ambassador Velketh has arrived for your scheduled meeting, the aide reported. He is waiting in conference room 7. Amara nodded and made her way toward the meeting, wondering what the ancient Sithari could possibly want to discuss. Their relationship had always been complicated, colored by the weight of history and the knowledge that Velketh had been among those who voted to declare humanity extinct. The old ambassador was already seated when she arrived, his forearms folded carefully in his lap and his eyes dimmed with age. He looked smaller than she remembered, diminished somehow, as if the years had finally caught up with him. "Thank you for seeing me," Velketh said, as she took her seat across from him. "I know you have little reason to meet with me. Given our history, the new assembly requires cooperation between all species," Amara replied neutrally. "Even those with complicated pasts." Velketh made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Complicated," he repeated. "That is a generous word for what my generation did to yours." He fell silent for a long moment, and Amara waited patiently for him to continue. "I am dying," he finally said. "My species lives for 3,000 years, and I have exceeded that span by nearly half a millennium. And my physicians tell me I have perhaps a few months remaining." "I am sorry to hear that," Amara said. And she found that she meant it, despite everything. There was something sad about watching the last of the old order fade away. "I requested this meeting because I wanted to speak with you before I pass," Velketh said. "I wanted to say something that I should have said 5 years ago, when your fleet arrived and proved how wrong we had been." He looked up at her with ancient eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. "We underestimated you," he said. "We saw a young species, loud and chaotic and fragile, expanding too quickly and refusing to accept our wisdom. And we thought we were pruning a weed before it could choke the garden." His voice grew heavy with regret. "We told ourselves that it was necessary, that we were protecting the galaxy from a dangerous and unpredictable force. But the truth is that we were afraid." "Afraid of what?" Amara asked. "Afraid of what you represented," Velketh replied. "Afraid of change, of disruption, of a species that might one day surpass us and make our ancient empires irrelevant." He shook his head slowly. "We had grown so old and so comfortable that we could not tolerate the idea of something new and vital rising to challenge us. And so we tried to destroy you rather than face our own decline." Amara considered his words carefully before responding. "Your fear nearly wiped out my entire species," she said. 8 billion people died because you could not accept that the galaxy was big enough for all of us." "I know," Velketh said. "And I have carried that guilt for 300 years. Watching and waiting for the consequences of our actions to finally arrive." He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. But what I saw when your fleet came was not what I expected, he said. I expected vengeance. Expected fire and destruction and the end of everything we had built. And instead, Amara prompted. Instead, I saw something that shamed me more than any act of revenge ever could, Velkith said. I saw a species that had every right to hate us. Every justification to burn our worlds as we burned yours. Choose mercy instead. His voice cracked with emotion. You were stronger than us, he said. Not just in ships or weapons, but in spirit. And you proved that humanity deserved to survive by showing us what we had lost in ourselves. Amara felt something shift in her chest, and she realized that she had been carrying anger toward this old alien for years without ever acknowledging it. What do you want me to say? She asked quietly. Velkith reached out and touched her hand with one of his weathered limbs. I want you to know that at least one of us understood, he said. I want you to know that when I die, I will go to whatever awaits my people, carrying the knowledge that humanity was always better than we were, and that we destroyed ourselves the moment we chose to destroy you. He withdrew his hand and sat back. And I want to ask for something that I have no right to request, he added. Ask. Amara said, forgiveness, Velkith whispered. Not for me, but for my people. For all the species that stood by while your world burned, and I know it is too much to ask. But I ask it anyway. Amara was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was soft. Forgiveness is not something I can give on behalf of 8 billion dead, she said. But I can tell you this. We did not come back to punish the children for the sins of their ancestors. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mixed cityscape below. We came back to build something better, she said. Something that includes all of us, human and alien alike. And that is as close to forgiveness as we can offer. Velkith nodded slowly, and she saw peace settle over his ancient features. That is more than we deserve, he said. And more than enough. He rose with difficulty and made his way toward the door, pausing at the threshold to look back. Your species has a saying, he said, that the best revenge is living well. Amara smiled slightly. We have another saying, she replied. That the best revenge is becoming something your enemies could never imagine. Velkith returned her smile with a tired expression of his own. You have done both, he said. And then he was gone. Later that evening, Amara returned to her quarters and stood before a holographic display that showed a slowly rotating image of Earth. It had been reconstructed from old data. A planet she had never seen, a home she could only imagine below the image. An inscription glowed with soft blue light. From ash, we rose, it read. From silence, we returned. And from extinction, we endured. Outside her window, human and alien ships passed each other in the void. Former enemies learning slowly to become something else. The galaxy had declared humanity dead, but humanity had refused to stay buried. And now, as they built a new future from the ashes of the old, they carried with them a truth that would echo through the ages. They had survived the worst the universe could throw at them. They had chosen mercy when vengeance would have been so much easier, and they had proven that the measure of a species is not what it suffers, but what it becomes. The humans were no longer ghosts on the edge of extinction. They were the architects of tomorrow, and the galaxy would never underestimate them again.